The New Testament reading is from the Gospel according to Matthew, the 5th chapter. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment." But I say to you, if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, "Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce." But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord." But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your own head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God. So I grew up here in Central Ohio, but my grandparents didn't. My papa and grandma were hillbillies, and I use that term with the sincerest endearment. He was a coal miner and a carpenter, and she never graduated from high school or even got a driver's license. So from a very young age, I knew what that all-important English word, y'all, meant. Anybody from Pittsburgh? Because I don't get the yins thing. We can talk about that's not in my notes. So whenever we would leave Kilby and Melvina's house, yes, those are their amazing Appalachian names. Whenever we would leave Kilby and Melvina's house, a common benediction would be, "Y'all come back now, you hear?" And I think y'all know what that means too. But the English language can be tricky and complicated and even goofy at times. So before we move forward in today's gospel text from Jesus' timeless and world-famous Sermon on the Mount, let me do a brief experiment. Will you please stand up? Okay, so you know I didn't mean you. You know I meant y'all. Right? Okay, have a seat. Thanks. Next question, will you please give me a cup of water? Okay, so I didn't mean y'all. I'm actually not thirsty. I have my water bottle here. So you saw, I used the same word twice, and you did two totally different things. That's very interesting. Y'all knew I meant two different things when I said, will you please stand up, and will you please get me a cup of water? Okay, that's the end of the experiment. Now we'll go back to the sermon. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount starts out beautiful and serene, almost like when you're listening, you can see the peaceful and natural view from that mountaintop where he's preaching. It's all blessing from the beginning. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the peacemakers. Then to this landscape of blessing, Jesus adds color and flavor. You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. Pastor Jenny has explored these two gospel texts with you the last 2 Sundays. Now some new ingredients get added to this recipe of blessing and color and flavor. And these new ingredients are anger, murder, divorce, adultery, and broken promises. I guess the recipe called for some bitters. It's quite a dish. Anger, murder, divorce, adultery, broken promises. The list of ingredients kind of reminds me of that old commercial, 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions, on a sesame seed bun. So admit, did you ever practice saying that really fast or singing the song? Not just, okay, good. Now I know who's all like 40 and older, like me. But Matthew 5 is a little bit spicier than a Big Mac. We have some challenging topics in this passage, but not only that, things also get gruesome. Did you catch it? This is why I've always referred to this as the pirate passage. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. Matthew's community gathered the oral traditions and the sayings and the stories of Jesus into a document in the common Greek language sometime in the last quarter of the first century. Yet since then, we have not seen a huge spike among so-called Jesus-following, so-called Bible-believing Christians purchasing eye patches and prosthetic hooks. I even Googled it. And that's a screen capture from my laptop. Among the 797,000 search results, I couldn't find any evidence that Christians anywhere have really taken these bloody admonitions literally. Now, perhaps I would have had more time to prepare a better sermon had I not gone down that rabbit hole. But I blame the Google gods for that misdeed. So today, on the 6th Sunday of Epiphany, this lectionary text that is being read in all kinds of churches all over the world has given us some bitter and gruesome material to explore. So what the hell is going on here? And for my mom, who might watch this on Facebook Live later, I didn't introduce that 4-letter word into the conversation this morning. Who did? Jesus did. Okay, Mom? This section of the Sermon on the Mount is known as the 6 antitheses. After the blessed and colorful and flavorful setup, Jesus turns to a rhythm of language that breaks our thinking and in the end guides us to a view of love at the top of this mountain he's sitting on. These antitheses are set up by the same couplet phrases over and over again. You have heard that it was said, but I say to you. Will you say this with me? You have heard it said, but I say to you. 6 times this pattern repeats. 4 of these are in today's gospel reading, murder, adultery, divorce, promises. Then the passage goes on beyond what we're looking at today in verses 38 to 48 of Matthew chapter 5 to address the 5th and 6th of the antitheses in this series. So for a wider view of kind of what Jesus is trying to get after, I'll read those to you now as well. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Now, not everyone agrees with that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say love your enemies bit. If you want to know what I mean, look up the broadcast or the transcript of the National Prayer Breakfast to know that some people agree with it and some people don't agree with it. We started our conversation this morning confirming that we all know the difference between you and y'all. We all even knew the difference based on context of when I was using the word you in a singular way to mean one person asking for a cup of water, and when I used you in a plural way to mean y'all stand up. We knew it. So this is what I suggest is the clue for seeing with two good eyes, none having been plucked out and thrown away, seeing with two good eyes through the bitterness and the gore of these antitheses to the radical root of what Jesus is lovingly and trying to communicate to his followers, to his listeners, to his skeptics, and to his critics. Because in the original language of Koine Greek, or Common Greek, that Matthew's gospel was written in, the couplets actually read this way. You have heard it said, but I say to y'all. Will you read that with me? You have heard it said, but I say to y'all. 6 times in a row, the same form, over and over. You have heard that it was said, but I say to y'all. You have heard that it was said, but I say to y'all. Jesus is showing us that the root issue with these challenging and bitter and painful parts of life isn't only about individual sin or piety or perfection or performance, but primarily about the health and wholeness of the community. In each phrase, he starts with me and moves to we. Starts with you and moves to y'all in each phrase. So have you ever been part of a we? Have you ever been part of a y'all? Maybe a team or a band or a choir. Perhaps when you were young, you played a sport in school or were in the marching band. Perhaps now you play on St. John's kickball team in the summer or sing in St. John's gospel choir throughout the year, and you know what it's like to be part of a we and part of a y'all. These community experiences are so very different than running a marathon alone or singing a solo or Castaway or any of those Bear Grylls wild solo survival shows. It's about a group of people being together, breathing together, belonging together, building together, blooming together. In fact, we're doing it right now. You know, even the word translated church in the Bible doesn't mean an architectural structure with bricks and mortar and pews and pulpits and a mailing address and a mortgage. The original word is ecclesia, and it means an assembly of people. It means we. This isn't church. Y'all are church. In church, I'm talking to you, not the building. The message of hope and love in life today isn't for you. It's for y'all. This concept of the primacy and priority of we over me, of the community over the individual, is hard as hell. Yes, there's that word again, Mom. It's hard for most of us in a Western capitalist society where the will of the individual and the importance of material profit drives so many decisions and interactions. But to the first Christians in the first century that were hearing Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and reading Matthew's Gospel, this was an ethos and a value that was lived out in radical and practical ways. If you need proof of that, the New Testament book of Acts makes it clear. Acts chapter 2 says, all who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. There have been other cultures at certain times and places throughout history around the world who have more fully embraced this message of y'all. Reverend Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Emeritus of Cape Town, says this: you can't be human all by yourself. When you have this quality, Ubuntu, you are known for your generosity. We think of ourselves far too frequently as just individuals separated from one another, whereas you are connected, and what you do affects the whole world. You can't be human all by yourself. So actually, that is the one-sentence sermon summary that I would beg you to remember if you remember anything today. You can't be human all by yourself. So when Jesus talks about murder, the real issue isn't forensic files and evidence and motive and a murder weapon and a body. The real issue is anger and how certain expressions of anger dehumanize not only the receiver, but also the giver of such bitterness. And when Jesus talks about adultery, the real issue isn't certain state-defined and culturally bound and patriarchal understandings of the institution of marriage. The real issue is the commodification of the sacred sensuality of an unwilling person. Going on, when Jesus talks about divorce, the real issue isn't disillusions and decrees and court orders and custody. The real issue is accountability in the agency of each spouse in a partnership, regardless of gender or sexuality or the power differential that exists within certain times and cultures. And when Jesus talks about promises, vows, oaths, and swearing, the real issue isn't about contracts and cuss words. The real issue is living your truth and letting that be enough. It's all about affirming the full humanity of others. And don't forget also affirming your own full humanity with your words and actions and thoughts and feelings. Because when individual efforts to dehumanize others enter into our lives and our communities, we're already living in hell, y'all. Oh yeah, hell. It's talked about in this passage, so let's not ignore it. Jesus says, clearly using hyperbole, evidenced in part by the lack of Christians with eye patches and prosthetic hooks, that it's better to cut out and cut off our problematic areas than it is to end up, not in hell, but in a landfill, in Gehenna. That's a valley south of Jerusalem. That's the word he used. It was a valley, Gehenna, where the city's trash and dead animals would be piled and burned away. And there, wild dogs would weep and gnash their teeth at the smoldering dump as they fought each other off and searched for rotting food. That's actually what Jesus says here. It's better to pluck out our eye and cut off our hand than all of us to end up in Gehenna, a landfill. Well then, with heaven on our minds, let's keep moving through this hellish sermon and get after one more thing that I would like to explore together with y'all this morning. Because there's still the bit about pirates. The plucking out of the eyes, the cutting off of hands. So what the landfill is that all about? We read it wrong. That's a dad joke, as my son would say. We read it wrong through the clumsiness of translations and the individuality of our culture when we think it's talking directly and specifically about your optical organ or my phalanges and opposable thumb. Again, this message is not for you, but it's for y'all. So what do we need to leave behind? Even if it's hard and even if it hurts, in order for us to move forward together toward life and love, y'all. I don't have all the answers. Honestly, I don't even want to have all the answers. So instead of me suggesting solutions to that question, let's take cues on how to respond to this question from two martyrs who died for love and justice, whom we have recently celebrated, St. Martin and St. Valentine. In a speech in Atlanta in May 1967, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. identified what he referred to as the triple evils. There's no good reason for me to summarize his thoughts on the matter when his own prophetic and provocative words can speak for themselves. So this is a rather lengthy passage from a Dr. King speech. He says, 3 major evils: the evil of racism, the evil of poverty, and the evil of war. These are the three things that I want to deal with today. Now let us turn first to the evil of racism. There can be no gainsaying of the fact that racism is still alive all over America. Racial injustice is still the Black Americans' burden and America's shame. And we must face the hard fact that many Americans would like to have a nation which is a democracy for white Americans, but simultaneously a dictatorship over Black Americans. We must face the fact that we still have much to do in the area of race relations. The second evil that I want to deal with is the evil of poverty. Like a monstrous octopus, it spreads its nagging, prehensile tentacles into cities and hamlets and villages all over our nation. Some 40 million of our brothers and sisters are poverty-stricken, unable to gain the basic necessities of life. And so often we allow them to become invisible because our society is so affluent that we don't see the poor. Some of them are Mexican Americans. Some of them are Native Americans. Some are Puerto Ricans. Some are Appalachian whites. The vast majority are Black Americans in proportion to their size in the population. Now, there is nothing new about poverty. It's been with us for years and centuries. What is new at this point, though, is that we now have the resources. We now have the skills. We now have the techniques to get rid of poverty. And the question is whether our nation has the will. Now, I want to deal with the third evil that constitutes the dilemma of our nation and the world, and that is the evil of war. Somehow, these three evils are tied together. The triple evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism. The great problem and the great challenge facing humankind today is to get rid of war. We have left ourselves as a nation morally and politically isolated in the world. We have greatly strengthened the forces of reaction in America and excited violence and hatred among our own people. We have diverted attention from civil rights. During a period of war, when a nation becomes obsessed with the guns of war, social programs inevitably suffer. People become insensitive to pain and agony in their own midst. Those were the words of Dr. King addressing, in his wisdom, how to avoid living together in a hellish landfill. He says we need to pluck out and cut off racism, poverty, and war. So not only St. Martin, but also St. Valentine has some cues for us. His martyrdom was celebrated Friday with roses and chocolates. He also has cues for us. This is because St. Valentine was clubbed to death and posthumously beheaded on February 14th, 269, for resisting the morally depraved policies of a narcissistic and abusive political leader and instead standing for love. When marriage was banned by the Roman Emperor Claudius II in the 3rd century because it distracted people from his militaristic ambitions, that's one of Dr. King's triple evils, interestingly, St. Valentine said, #not my emperor, and married people anyway. As Greg Tobin, author of Holy Holidays, The Catholic Origins of Celebration, says, St. Valentine did this for love of love and love of God. St. Valentine shows us by his life and death an enduring romantic legacy that anything that gets in the way of love, that prohibits people who love each other from being together, needs to be plucked out and cut off, because love wins, y'all. So after a couple weeks in the blessed, colorful, and flavorful opening passages of the Sermon on the Mount, today's gospel text presented us with a bitter recipe of murder, anger, adultery, divorce, and broken promises. Not only that, it also suggested some very gruesome and gory solutions for being sure that our lives don't end up in a landfill. But with a closer look, we see that Jesus and Desmond Tutu are telling us that you can't be human all by yourself. So let's leave behind whatever's in the way of love and move forward together toward life, y'all. Will you read this with me? You can't be human all by yourself. Amen.